Hello, hello. Today we have a continuation of the adventures of Skyler and Nick. It's a bit of a long story, so you might want to start at the beginning. And it is written by A Mysterious Lurker. Enjoy. My day job slowed down after the last case I took with Nick. It was 2 weeks and he was still under house arrest, forbidden to go on another case until he recovered. The last case he had displayed a power no one was aware of, not even himself. I would send him texts, which he replied to seconds after. I could tell he was very bored at home, even though all his messages sounded neutral. I wasn't busy when Nick called. He only called when he was asking for a job. As far as I knew, he was still stuck at home and shouldn't be asking for help on a job. "Can I ask a favor?" Nick asked when I answered the call. I wasn't expecting that. Nick was the type to never ask something that wasn't for work. A personal favor was a big deal. "Yeah, of course. What's going on?" I asked, a bit worried about his change. "It's not too big of an issue, but it requires you to come to my home. Are you free today? I can explain everything once you are here." This was weird. Far weirder than the witches in the woods or trolls under bridges. I would go over to see him, but I couldn't shake the feeling this was a bit of a big deal. "I'm not busy. Where do you live?" "That's a bit complicated." That wasn't a comforting statement. He explained he would have someone pick me up from the front of my apartment. Due to what was stored inside his house, no one was able to know where it was located. Only the higher-ups of the corporation and his driver were able to go to his place. A black car with tinted windows drove up in front of my apartment building. I didn't know a lot about cars, but I knew this kind cost a fortune. The car smelled new inside, and I almost felt guilty for sitting on the leather seats. The driver didn't even look at me. We drove off, the tinted windows making it impossible to see. For a moment, I felt a lurch in my stomach. I knew the corporation could connect 2 doorways for easier travel, but wasn't aware of any ways to transport cars. We only drove for 10 minutes, making me think we were magically teleported somewhere in the world. There was no way Nick lived so close by. I thanked the silent driver and got out of the car. Whatever kind of place I thought Nick lived inside, it was never this. The car left me behind staring with my mouth open at his house. It wasn't even a house, it was a mansion. It looked Victorian in nature and ridiculously detailed. I bet the front doors were even made of wood that cost more than what I would ever make in my entire lifetime. I was winded by the time I made it up the polished stone steps, which I suspected to be marble. Nick was waiting for me and opened the door before I knocked. "Hey, Jack Nicholson. How are you?" I trailed off when I looked at him. I'd been sure he only owned suits, yet he was standing there wearing baggy sweatpants and a pale pink oversized sweater. His hair was pulled back in a white bandana. "Did you get new clothes?" I asked, looking at him. "How did you know?" Reaching over, I pulled off a sticker from his pants, showing the size. He must have just gotten the set of clothing if he hadn't taken the tags off yet. I followed him inside and was awed at his place again. I just couldn't believe Nicky lived in a place like this. I always assumed he was a minimalist and would never own so much stuff. The flooring was made of pristine marble tiles with glittering lines of grout that appeared to be gold. I didn't want to think about the amount of real gold that was set into his floor. There was a complex and beautiful mural of the planets, which was labeled in a language I didn't understand. Some bigger stars were included and labeled as well. I paused at a centerpiece covered with clutter. Some vases and other kinds of pottery were laid out in a random order and covered the entire table, which was draped with deep purple silk. The more I looked, the more I saw the rich details of the home. I heard a small sound, and my eyes traveled towards it. A cat walked across the other side of the room, paws patting across the flooring. At first I thought it was a normal cat wearing something on his head. When it turned its face towards me, I jumped back, knocking a vase off the table. The cat had a human face with a bowl cut and cat ears on top of its head. Orange eyes stared in my direction. The creature didn't care for me and kept walking. "Are you all right?" Nick asked as he walked back to the table. "Yeah, your cat startled me. I'm sorry about your vase. Was it expensive?" I bent down to try and clean up the pieces, but Nick stopped me. "No, it wasn't. I just buy cheap souvenirs whenever I go on a job. Don't worry about it either way. As long as I have all the pieces there, I can repair it as if it was never broken. I should have warned you about Charles. I forgot people have never seen a cat like her," he explained as I straightened up. "Her?" "I was unaware not all names are unisex until recently," he said, and that explained a little bit about him. "I didn't notice what time it is. I need to feed the twins quickly, then we can speak in the kitchen." The twins? Did he own more pets? I thought back to our last case with a pair of lizards with a shutter. I still hadn't recovered from the horrors of that job. I followed behind Nick, not certain if he wanted me to stick with him or not. We walked through a long hallway covered in paintings. Some looked ancient, while others were leaning against the floor and had thrift store tags on them. We opened a door to one of the rooms, and a blast of humid air hit my face. The room was covered with plants. The entire space converted into a reptile enclosure. He went to some shelves to take out the food for his pets, and I jumped back when I saw it was looking at me through the plants. "You kept them?" I asked, appalled that Nick had the twin lizards from our last case in his house. "Well, yes. They won't turn back and are of no threat to others. If I didn't take them, they would have been killed and examined. I'm not home very often, so I may need to hire someone to care for them, or find a better owner." Each lizard came out of the bushes to eat from his hands. I was dumbfounded. This pair nearly killed us. They could have done even worse. I still had a scar on my face, and yet Nick could see past all that. He was a better person than I was. That was for sure. I would be unable to see these lizards as anything but the monsters they were before. He gave them a checkup to ensure they were healthy and to ensure he could leave them alone for a while longer. Leading me to the kitchen, I found a stool to sit in as he got ready to tell me the reason I was called over. His kitchen was modern compared to the rest of the house, one that looked as if it should be in the home of a celebrity instead of a lowly agent. Nicky was loaded. The room was warm and smelled of baking. Along the marble counters were 3 rows of quiches that appeared to be of different types and flavors. Nick was cleaning a spot on the counter, making it clear he was cooking before I arrived. "Do you want something to eat while I talk?" he offered. Normally I didn't like quiche all that much, as I wasn't very into pie crusts, but this was something my partner made. I needed to try it. I nodded, and he placed a slice on a gold-trimmed plate. The flavor appeared to be chosen at random. Honestly, I didn't like quiche until I had his. Pie crust never tasted so good. Looking over at all the others he had cooling off, I could tell he had a lot of practice. "I've been stuck at home for over a week. It's boring, and I may have gone overboard on the cooking," Nick explained, following my gaze. After the counter was cleared, he started making tea. I've learned more about my partner in the past few minutes than I had in our 4 cases together. I didn't know how to feel about that. "I never really saw you as the type to cook or bake," I said, still not getting over what I was seeing. "I like baking. It's similar to alchemy." He noticed my confused face and went on. "The reason why this house is so hidden away is because it belonged to a master alchemist. Below this mansion is a place dubbed the catacombs. It's a deep maze where he did his work. Most of it remains, his projects half finished and knowledge hidden away for good reasons. I was created in the lowest level and the only remaining living experiment." I nearly choked on the tea he'd set down in front of me. This was a lot at once. I didn't know anything about alchemy besides the base things most people are aware of. Nick was speaking in a distant tone. I was glad he trusted me enough to tell me these things, but wanted to know why he was suddenly revealing stuff that should be classified. "You don't sound very fond of the place, and yet you like baking?" I asked. I refused another piece, and he placed the plate in the sink. Charles jumped up in my lap, startling me. The human face was nerve-wracking to look at, but when she curled up, I found I could tolerate her being there. "I suppose I like it because I understand it. Alchemy makes sense. It's an equal exchange of matter, unlike magic, which creates something from nothing. Baking, you put your ingredients together, add heat and time. If you've done it correctly, you've created something. Alchemy is like that. You can create almost anything if you sacrifice what's needed." That made sense. For someone who was made based on more logic-based processes, magic must seem complicated. I thought about what I knew about alchemy. Didn't Nicholas something or other make a philosopher's stone? That must be where Nick got his name. I paused with my cup of tea hovering in the air. The troll called Nick a half-finished stone. If someone was able to create something even half as powerful as the philosopher's stone, they would want to keep that hidden. I quickly set down my cup, hoping Nick didn't notice the change in my mood. I was almost certain I figured out what he was, but didn't bring it up. If he wanted me to know, he would tell me. "You haven't told me why you needed me over," I brought up. "Oh, you're right. I bring in animals or supernatural creatures to keep safe until I can rehome them. Most of them would be killed unless I do. I really shouldn't be doing this, so no one can know about Charles or the pet that went missing recently." "Missing?" I questioned while looking at the human-faced cat. I didn't think it'd be good if any of these creatures got loose, even if he thought they were harmless. "I have an owner lined up for her, but haven't been able to find Gregory in the main house or on the grounds. She can't go beyond the barrier keeping this place hidden. The only other place she could be is in the catacombs. If that's the case, I cannot find her on my own. That place. It's impossible for me to find my way around. Even if I walk in a straight line, I get lost. I was never meant to come out of there." The distant tone in his voice came back. He glanced out the window and into the bright sunlight filling the kitchen. The window was open a little, letting a breeze flutter the sheer curtains. It was an ordinary moment, but one Nick assumed he would never see at some point. And yet he was ready to go back down into the dark place of his past to find a lost pet. "Do you really need to come along with me? I can go down on my own and look for, Gregory?" What is Gregory anyway? After seeing he owned an odd cat and a pair of lizards that nearly killed us, Gregory could be anything. He paused, wondering how to describe her. "She's a spider, about the size of a dinner plate." He raised his hands up, trying to give me an idea of the size. I tensed and Charles sensed it. She jumped from my lap and I felt the quiche trying to come back up. I hated spiders. I hated them so much. The idea there might be one that size roaming this house made me jumpy and my skin itch. "You're not afraid of spiders, are you?" "Nope," I replied. That was the biggest lie of my life. But this was a favor for Nick. He never asked for anything, so finding a lost spider was the least I could do. I would have him with me so he could catch it. I would look for the thing, not touch it. With everything settled, I got ready to start looking for one of my worst nightmares. Nick grabbed some slip-on tennis shoes and put them on. His comfy clothing was still an adjustment to see. We left the kitchen behind, and a feeling of dread settled in my stomach. Since the place was so huge, it took us a while to walk to the middle of the house. The entrance to the catacombs was hidden behind an ornate door decorated with more gold. If the one who made this place was an alchemist, all this gold had to be real. I heard once there was only enough gold on the planet to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool. It was one of those facts you heard in your youth, believed it to be true, and never thought or questioned it again. And yet, this house alone had triple that amount. The door needed to be opened using a hefty key, as well as some of Nick's blood that he got from pricking his finger. Gears turned as the gold murals moved, and the doors opened on their own. The room beyond glittered so brightly I needed to cover my eyes before they adjusted. Nick's footsteps echoed over the glass flooring. The round room had a glass dome ceiling that let light pour through. It reflected off the floor and the massive crystals surrounding the room. Each crystal pillar along the wall nearly reaching the ceiling as they shone a transparent golden yellow. This alchemist definitely had a favorite color. More circle murals made of delicate gold were inlaid into the glass. I couldn't understand what any of it meant. It all appeared ancient and magical to my eyes. One panel of the glass was missing. That was an easy entry point for a spider to go inside if it got into the room to start with. I stopped in the middle of the room with Nick looking down, trying to take in all the details. "This place is crazy," I said, unable to help myself. That's one word to describe it. Oddly enough, he almost sounded bitter. Taking my hand, he started to wrap a ribbon around my wrist. Then he tied it to his own, so we were connected. I raised my eyebrow, questioning the process. "Really?" I asked. "Really," he confirmed. Nicky must really have a hard time down below if he needed to be literally attached to me as we wandered around looking for his pet. I didn't see any way of getting beyond the glass. How was answered shortly as Nick pricked his finger again and let a drop of blood hit a small ruby set into the floor in the middle of the circle we stood in. Something jerked below our feet and the glass started to descend. We both appeared nervous for different reasons. I didn't want to find the spider, and Nick didn't want to return to his past. At least we were together to face this journey. The space below wasn't as dark as I assumed it would be. It was made of dark stone. The glass clicked down and Nick hesitated to step forward, as I ended up being the one to guide him along down the few steps and deeper into the catacombs. Our footsteps echoed as we carefully made our way to a carved stone railing. The catacombs were a circle, each floor with a set number of arched doorways embedded into the stone walls. To get to the next level, there was an opening to a set of stairs next to the railing. I looked over trying to see the bottom, but only saw darkness. This place would take years to fully search. I could only hope that spider would come to us. I started towards the first door and felt tension on the ribbon. Nick was trying to walk the other way, looking disoriented. "Sorry, I looked away from you and got lost," he said after he recovered and started to follow my steps again. He wasn't joking about this place messing with his sense of direction. Unless he was looking directly at me, he no longer could find his way. How he ever got out of the catacombs in the first place was a mystery. Opening the first wooden door, I looked inside the room. Dust kicked up into the air. Oddly enough, I could see just fine. Some sunlight poured in through the glass ceiling, but it was dim. The room had a wooden table and stacks of old tomes rotting away on top. I didn't bother looking at them. There were 3 more doorways, one on the left, right, and in the back of the small room. I understood the doors connected to the rooms on either side, but didn't know just how far back this went. I decided to do all the rooms in a circle. Once we made it back to this one, we could start checking the back rooms until we ran out. I picked the right, opening the door to see more of the same. Scrolls and a rotted, half-collapsed wooden shelf. This room also had a door in the back of the room. Even with the door closed, I could see in the room. "We don't have any flashlights, so why can I see so well?" I asked. As far as I was aware, I didn't pick up any abilities to see in the dark. The one who created this place had a mage friend who owed him a favor. There is a spell running through this entire place, making so that the light is the same as the night of the full moon, but it is only in the same room you're inside. If you open a door and walk away, then look into it, it'll be dark. Nick said as he gave a scroll a kick of his foot. It crumbled under the slight touch. "So, this place operated like it would in a video game, huh?" In fact, it gave me a dungeon crawl vibe. I hadn't played any games recently, but I'd been into Diablo when I was younger. I thought of the spider boss in that game and suppressed a shudder. Nick would never bring me somewhere dangerous without having a warning first. But if we ran into anything besides a spider, I was out of there. As we searched each room without any sign of Gregory, I contained the urge to ask Nick some questions about the place. This place was clearly something he didn't want to talk about. No matter how much I wanted to know what went on down here, I would respect his privacy. I didn't count the rooms, but we circled back to the one we started in. I opened the back door, stepped inside, and nearly tripped over a crude vase. "How big is this place?" I asked, wondering how far these back rooms went. "I have no idea." That wasn't comforting. If we didn't find Gregory, we may need to come back later. Nick was off work for a bit longer, and I could take some time off for him. Weaving around the vases, I went to the next door. At least the rooms weren't all that big. I didn't want to break or touch anything, but Nick didn't appear to care. Our ribbon caught on a vase, tipping it over before I could catch it. It smashed and I winced, expecting him to say something. Don't worry about it. Everything on the upper levels is where he stored the failures, Nick told me. He made me feel a little bit better about smashing something that looked old enough and might have had some value. Most of the rooms we searched were mostly empty after the vase room. We entered a room with piles of what looked to be coal in the corner. Nick stopped to look at them. The air felt like a tomb. The way he looked at the discarded rocks, it was as if he was really looking at a burial site. My suspicions of him being an imperfect philosopher's stone were validated a little bit more after seeing how he acted. Were these stones the discarded practice that eventually led to Nick being created? I didn't ask, and he didn't offer any information. I had lost track of how many layers we'd gone through when the worst happened. Nick and I got separated. It was neither of our faults, just something we couldn't predict. I was standing in an almost empty stone room when I looked over to him. Do you have the time? How long do you want to look for? We can do one floor at... My train of thought was cut off as the brickwork under my feet shifted. In a blink of an eye, I was standing, then I was falling. Nick grabbed the ribbon, keeping us connected in a desperate attempt to save me. He was dragged down, his body hitting a more stable area of the floor. The ribbon caught and my arms jerked up, supporting my entire body weight for a moment. I felt my shoulder pop. Then the ribbon snapped from my weight and being against rough bricks. I heard Nick call my name. I couldn't reply. A small stone came falling with me and smashed into my head above my temple. It knocked me out for a few minutes. Oh no. Seems as if poor Skyler's hit rock bottom. Well, there's nowhere to go but up. If you're not getting knocked unconscious every few hours, are you even a private investigator? Let's get her on to part 2, shall we? When I woke up, my shoulder felt like it was on fire and my head throbbing. My left eye forced shut by blood coming from a cut on my forehead. I sat suspended off the ground by something I assumed to be a hammock. When I noticed what broke my fall, I shrieked and struggled free. I crashed down to the ground, my shoulders screaming in pain, but it was worth not being tangled up in some oversized spider webs. My panic overrode my sense of pain. I scanned the entire room looking for Gregory. When I did a triple take of the room, I forced myself to look at the hole in the ceiling. Nick! Stay there, okay? I'll find my way back up! I shouted into the darkness. No answer came. I started to worry that, now that I wasn't near, Nick wouldn't have something to focus on, and he already wouldn't know where he stood. I didn't know if this place messed him up so badly that even if he stood still he could get lost. The moment he moved, I might not be able to find him again. First, I needed to get to the center and find the stairs up. I couldn't have fallen too far if I wasn't harmed from the fall. Starting to the right, I opened the door, not even looking around the new room. If I hit a dead end, I would go the other way until I found the stairs. As I moved, I called Nick's name, hoping he heard me. This place was creepy as hell, and I didn't enjoy the idea of a giant spider ready to jump out from the dark at any moment. As I went through room after room, I didn't bother with other doors in the direction I wasn't moving in. Then, somehow, I walked into the room I started at. I got confused. It was possible I went in a circle instead of towards the stairs, or to where the line of doors ended. Just in case, I picked up a sharp rock and walked over the door in the opposite direction I came from. I marked an X on the stone door frame and did the same with each door I walked through. This way I would know which one I've already entered because all the rooms looked the same. I carried on feeling as if I made some progress. I was about to mark a frame when an X made me stop. For a moment I thought I had already been there. This X was drawn inside a circle. I wasn't the one who made that mark. Brushing aside dust, I saw more faint markings further down the frame. Almost child height. Dread started to pool in my stomach. Now that I noticed that marking, I was starting to see more of them. Under the dust, someone a long time ago was lost and marked their way. But the problem being the markings overlapped, as if they came into the room again and couldn't see their old marker, then placed a new one. After seeing them, I knew what happened to Nick. This place made it impossible for him to recognize or remember what each room looked like. Even if he'd been there before, even if he'd marked it before, each was a new room to him. Every step a new place. How long was he lost for? How long did he wander in this place trying to get free? Did he find the center and look up at the far-off glass ceiling and just pray that someday he could make it there? I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I didn't want to think about the torment my partner went through. The catacombs kept showing me signs of his past. I wanted to ignore them in order to focus on finding him, but what remained behind made it impossible. I kept walking in one direction. I stopped, looking at a door, and my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. A wooden door with 2 thick beams placed across it, as if trying to keep something inside. There was a crack in the door, and through it a small, pale hand hanging limply. It was child-sized, and aside from being pale, it didn't appear decomposed. My mind thought whoever it belonged to might still be alive. I didn't think. I rushed over to lift the beams free, trying to get into that room. Dust clogged the air, causing me to cough violently, but still I pushed on. After the second beam got free, I dumped it on the ground to yank open the door. I expected to see a person on the other end, but instead a severed, cracked arm came with the door. I choked at the sight, thinking I was seeing part of a dead child. When I was able to look at it again, I noticed that the arm was actually broken off where it ended. It was so pale because it had been made of marble or some sort of similar stone. Recovering from my shock, I looked inside the room, only to let out a gasp at the sight. Piles of cracked and small broken bodies filled the room. They looked so frail. I didn't understand why anyone would sculpt so many realistic children only to toss them aside. Through some cracks of their broken faces, I saw glimmers of red, as if under their pale surface, each body was really made of ruby. Due to the sheer mass, I didn't notice the most horrifying fact right away. Each of them looked similar to Nick. I only took a step into the room to see better. The similarities sunk in, and I froze, my footing uneven. Looking down, I saw that there were countless gouges on the floor and on the inside of the door. Each scratch looked as if it had been made by small fingernails. The truth clicked in my head, and my stomach twisted. I was going to be sick. Rushing out, I stumbled on an old vase to puke up the quiche Nick cooked. It was not pleasant coming back up. All those bodies were alive at some point. Not just some sculpture or sick art project. The bastard that created Nick made so many before him. When they didn't live up to his expectations, he dumped them in that room and locked them away. How long did it take them to die? How many were placed in there at once? Were they alone as they clawed, trying to get free? Or did they have to watch each other die? Another thought came to mind that nearly made me sick again. Did Nick ever see this room? This place lived up to its name. It really was a tomb. I wasn't able to dwell on anything I'd seen. A sound came from behind me, and I thought that by some miracle Nick had found his way to me. Instead, Gregory was the one who found me first. I know Nicky can't lie. It's just not something he would ever think of doing. But the fact that Gregory was only the size of a dinner plate was bullshit. Her body was so big she could barely fit inside the door. She froze when I looked at her. We must have both startled each other. I did the only thing a reasonable person staring at a spider taking up an entire doorway, nearly half inside the room, would do. I screamed like a 5-year-old girl and ran. Due to her size, Gregory couldn't keep up, but she tried her best. Pressing her body through the archway, she chased me as I ran without thinking, her long legs trying to curl around my waist. My chest hurt from running so hard and so fast. If I didn't lose her soon, I wasn't going to make it. A closed door stood in my way, and I just slammed my good shoulder into it, causing the old wood to explode. I stumbled, losing some ground, but just kept going. Spiders were the only thing that could get me so motivated to run. Just as I started to feel dizzy from running so frantically, I stopped hearing Gregory behind me. I stopped, wheezing, and my throat tasting like blood. I could have died from running away from the spider instead of her killing me. I jumped, spooking myself, thinking I was seeing things out of the corner of my eyes, but it was just black shapes caused by the lack of oxygen to my brain. I got led into a false sense of security. My plan to redouble my efforts of finding Nick and getting the hell out of there. All those ideas came crashing down, literally, from the ceiling. I jumped out of the way when a few bricks fell. Gregory came tumbling down, dust and bricks blinding me. When I could see, I found her on top of me. A deadly-looking snare inches away from my stomach. Some liquid dripped from it, cooling my shirt. Fear froze my body as the massive spider jabbed the thin needle tip into my stomach. My muscles tensed up painfully, unable to do a damn thing to save myself. I fell into a deep darkness. My eyes opened. To my confusion, I wasn't in the catacombs, but rather in a forest. This couldn't be right, but it felt so real. I kept telling my brain I wasn't really there, that somehow I was dreaming. My mind didn't care if I was dreaming or not when I heard a familiar laughing coming from the dark trees. The witch from our first case a few feet away, her form growing and twisting. I ran, but my feet didn't move fast enough. No matter how hard I pushed, the trees surrounding me didn't move. I kept repeating that this could not be happening. When a sharp claw slammed against my back, tearing the flesh, I was no longer convinced this was a nightmare. I screamed in pain, and the darkness overtook my sight again. This time I woke up on the dark beach of the last case. I jolted up, my shoulder in pain. Within seconds, I spotted Nick. This time, not just his face was ruined, but also his stomach torn open. I became beyond any kind of rational thought. I screamed until my throat felt raw, my voice cut off by a sound I knew. A sound I hated and never wanted to hear again. The twin lizards' laughter carried over the beach. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't listen. I sent desperate signals to stand up before the pair found me, but I stayed sitting. A pair of claws wrapped under my arms as the younger brother lizard appeared from thin air in front of me. The older held me down as his brother reached over to rip my jacket to shreds. I thrashed my legs, trying to get free. I didn't want those bastards to touch me. I couldn't stand being there.
Skyler.
I was crying and screaming nonsense when someone calling my
Skyler.
name cut through the frantic state.
Skyler, wake up. Hey, it's all right. It's just a nightmare.
Coming out of the nightmare felt like swimming through molasses. Gasping, I still screamed as my eyes opened to see I was still in the catacombs. Nick was sitting next to me, his face creased with worry. It took me a long while before I calmed down. Nick was patting my back, unsure of what to do. It hurt my shoulder, but I let him continue. What? My throat raw, making it hard to speak. When a spider leg wrapped itself around Nick's neck, I screamed, hurting myself again. He raised his hands, trying to calm me down as Gregory skittered back a little.
She's friendly, I swear. Her venom should only have put you to sleep. In rare cases, it can give people vivid nightmares. She just wanted you to stay still so she could bring me over to you.
Nick explained, keeping his tone gentle. I still choked on fear. Still, I wanted to trust Nick. It's not his fault I was deathly afraid of spiders. Gregory looked tense. I could tell she felt bad for my reaction to the venom. If I just stood still when she found me to start with, she wouldn't have done something so desperate. She kept creeping closer and my skin crawled. My brain telling me she was friendly, but I still wanted to get as far away as possible. She reached out a front leg, holding it in the air. It was a sign of friendship. Pushing back my fear, I reached out to touch her soft tip of her leg. Nick looked a bit happy we were all getting along. I brought my hand back and needed to stop myself from wiping my hand on my pants.
I'm sorry. This was all my mistake. I thought Gregory was a different species. I wasn't aware she would grow to this size, or what kind of environment she preferred. It's no wonder why she found her way down here. I wasn't taking care of her properly.
I had already forgiven Nick for everything. None of this was his fault. I had a terrible experience and still shook, but I would never blame my partner. It's fine. Gregory still likes you. I do too. Now that we all found each other, I think it's about time to get the hell out of here. Nick gave me the smallest hint of a smile. Our ribbon was destroyed and I didn't know how I was going to guide him out besides holding his hand. Gregory solved that problem. She got low and Nick crawled between her head and her body. She started to move, hunching down so they could both fit through the door.
Do you want to come up here too?
Nick offered. I gave him a hard no. I was not going to touch Gregory again if I could help it. She knew the way out. In a few minutes, we came out of the last door and into the center. I followed behind as Gregory started up the spiral stairway. There was no railing and I needed to go slowly.
Her spider legs stuck to the sides, and she had no issues climbing up. Each step she made echo through the air, and it made my skin crawl and shoulders tense. I didn't relax until we stood in the glass center that raised us back to the house. Nick got down from Gregory and she scurried off through the still open doorway. My stomach was still uneasy from the trip. The sun above setting, making the glass-covered room appear orange. Looking over at Nick, I thought of everything I'd seen below. He started to walk away, but I stopped him by grabbing his shoulder. "Nicky, you're my friend and I love you, but I lied. I can't deal with spiders," I said, sounding exhausted.
"We're friends?"
Nick asked in an honest tone. Unable to help myself, I pulled him into a hug. His arms hovered at his side, unsure what to do.
"What is this for?"
he asked. "No reason. I just felt like doing it." After our awkward exchange, I let him lead me out of the room. I was very ready to head home to rest. Nick could tell. He brought me to the door, dirty and exhausted. Before I left, I went to the kitchen to pack up some quiches to send home with me. When he returned, he had 2 fabric grocery bags of quiche. I needed to buy a bigger freezer or I was going to keep up with all of these. A gentle knock at the door made us both jump. Nick answered the door and Abrash came inside. She happily greeted him, but looked confused at what I was doing there. Gregory being a creature that Nick might have adopted without anyone knowing, Abrash must never know what I really got called over for. "Hey, Skyler. I wanted to talk to you about something, so it's good you're both here. You'll hear all about it when Nick comes back to work either way. But it's a little personal, so I don't know if I should tell you with Nick here. Or if you want to do it privately and then decide how you want to tell Nick." Abrash stated. I had no idea what she was talking about.
"Did you come here just to give some news? I didn't think you could get off work for a personal issue,"
Nick said, looking as confused as I felt. "Well," Abrash started, looking a bit embarrassed. "I got suspended for 3 days because I broke Ansier's nose." I could understand anyone wanting to break that man's face, but I didn't think she was the type. I always assumed she would handle situations in a more clever way. "Good for you, but why though?" I chipped in. "It has to do with why I'm here. Ansier is really against humans. He finally read over your forms you filled out to be Nick's occasional partner. He was raging down the hallway, screaming about how we can't trust humans because they're liars. I honestly thought he was going to find you and hurt you. I stopped him by slamming a chair into his face and broke his nose." I wanted to laugh at the mental image, but I didn't know what got Ansier so riled up. Thinking back, I didn't know what on earth I lied about on those simple forms. Then it came to me all at once. Something I hadn't told Nick yet and hated speaking about. I didn't know how he would react to the news. Looking over at him, I got ready for my partner to take the truth poorly. Was he so upset because I checked off male on the gender box? I asked Abrash. She nodded with a long sigh. "Ansier is such a raging dick. I wish I broke more than his nose." We both waited for Nick to say something, his brain working overtime behind his neutral expression. Finally, he raised a hand as if in class asking a question.
"I don't understand why Ansier thought you were lying," he stated.
My stomach fluttered. Gathering up a bit of courage, I told him something that I wanted to avoid for as long as possible. "I was born female. I'm in the middle of transitioning. I still need one more surgery, but even if I'm able to get it, some people won't ever consider me to be male." I flinched at my own words and waited. Out of his baggy pants came a notebook he frantically flipped through, trying to find answers to a question he had yet to ask. We patiently waited for him to figure out what he wanted to ask.
"I must have misunderstood how humans understood sex and gender. I always assumed a human had a biological sex, male, female, or intersex. I had also assumed gender is a different thing and is in more of a spectrum and fluid possibly. I still don't know everything about human genders. If the forms asked your gender and you said male, it's not a lie, correct? If it was labeled sex, I could almost understand why Ansier could be so upset, but I don't see why he would be so angry over something minor." I honestly wasn't expecting Nick's response. He seemed clueless about so many other things, so I assumed someone being transgender might be too confusing for him. But he understood it better than most people I've spoken with about this topic. A crash from the kitchen took his attention away.
Oh, Charles is getting into something. I'll go clean that up. Abrash, I'll pack you some food as well.
Nick left us behind, and I felt a little stunned. That went well, I said finally. Abrash gave a small laugh. She'd known Nick for longer and didn't have the same kind of stress I did. She knew how he would react. Nick has always had a fluid way of thinking. He's always pretty accepting. There is a lot of stuff he doesn't know, but we went over the whole gender thing when he tried buying his own work shoes. That explained why Nick had no issues walking around in heels. I felt relieved that the one thing I'd sort of been hiding came out into the open. Abrash was on my side, and Nick didn't see me in a different way. He came back with 2 more tote bags for Abrash, who looked excited. Skyler, what are you doing here, anyway? She asked. As if on cue, Gregory came running across the front room in plain sight. Nick had his back turned, but his face paled a little. Abrash looked between him and me. Judging from her expression, Nicky really shouldn't own a giant spider.
Abrash, could you get Skyler home for me?
Nick asked at the same time he was pushing us out of the front door. Was that? She started. Nick had us both out and the door closed in a matter of seconds. We were both left out on the front steps, weighed down by a quiche. Luckily, Abrash dropped the spider issue. She walked me to her car that also had tinted windows. I sat in the front seat, but for some reason I couldn't see out of the windshield. Even though we were partners, I couldn't even know where Nick lived. She started down the long driveway, casting glances over my torn clothing and my face, still bloody from the cut. She knew I'd been down in the catacombs, but wasn't going to bring it up. I'm glad you and Nick are getting along. He's really brightened up since working with you. After what happened to us, rain started to hit the windows. I assumed he wouldn't recover. I didn't even notice gray clouds before I got into her car. I don't know anything about his last partner. I know she died, but what really happened? I asked, not expecting answers. She went feral. He was forced to kill her. My heart sank and my mouth went dry. I didn't want to hear those words. After everything else Nicky went through, having to kill his partner wasn't right. He kept her cell phone and the charms. It was clear he cared about her a great deal. It was just unfair. Abrash let me sit in silence, looking a bit sorry about what she told me. It's the reason why agents work in pairs. Going feral isn't that rare. Each agent must be strong enough to take down their partner if something happens. It's the main reason why Anseer doesn't want you working with Nick. If something happened and he went out of control, people may die before other agents can arrive to solve the problem. We sat listening to the rain. In our last case, Nick changed for a few minutes. He displayed a power no one knew about, one that he shouldn't have. He could have killed me, or worse. I wanted to believe I snapped him out of it, but he might have just run out of energy before he reached me. Should I not be working with him? I asked after a while. What? No, keep working with him. I mean, have you seen him lately? I would rather risk this world burning so Nick gets to spend some time with someone who actually cares about him. Abrash's sudden outburst startled me. After I recovered, I smiled at her. She was telling me I could be as selfish as I wanted. Risking the world to spend time with a friend might make me a bad person, but I really didn't care. I started to work with Nick because I needed the money. Now, I just wanted to make sure he was all right. We pulled up in front of my apartment building. I left one bag of quiche with Abrash because I didn't have the space for them. She had a big family, so the food would get eaten rather than staying inside my freezer. She gave me a warm goodbye. The trip back to my apartment felt like a journey. The moment I got inside, I tossed off my ruined clothing and had a shower. Gregory didn't leave much of a wound when she stung my stomach. The pain in my shoulder became manageable, and the cut in my forehead stopped bleeding, so I didn't need stitches. All in all, it wasn't as bad as I expected. After drying off and putting on clean clothing, I spotted an enemy in my apartment. A spider hanging out in my kitchen, behind the tap. I felt so tempted to kill it on sight. Gregory's big eyes came to mind. Instead, I spent the next 10 minutes getting it inside a cup and releasing it outside. I haven't fully conquered my fear of spiders, but at least this was a start.